And the title for that session is Looking for the Enemy, Mullah Omar and the Unknown Taliban. And the speakers for this session we have here Bette Dam, who's a journalist, Anas Mallick, who's also a journalist.
Today we're here to discuss this amazing book that Bette has written. It's called Mullah Omar and the Unknown Taliban. So there are a lot of myths surrounding the presence of Mullah Omar as to who he was, what sort of a person he was, where did he die. A lot of Pakistan connection has always been discussed as well in the media, in reports, and so on and so forth. But Bette has written a much more detailed account on the person and then again, and his connection to the movement, if I'm not mistaken. So let's hear it from Bette first as to who Mullah Omar really was and what's in the book. And then we'll open the floor for questions, and we're happy to take questions. Bette, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. Nice to launch the book also in Pakistan. Especially because Pakistan plays quite a role in my book. The book is about the leader of the Taliban, the former leader, Mullah Omar, who is not alive anymore. And many people wonder, like, why did I write a book about the Taliban, and especially about Mullah Omar? Some said it was impossible to write a book about him because he is the most mysterious person ever. Others said, "Ooh, don't do it because it's too dangerous. If you will get close to his circle, they will blow themselves up and you will die." But I felt I needed to do it as a journalist because when living in Afghanistan in the war on terror, the US war in Afghanistan, I just felt that this was a totally underreported part of the conflict. We were basically constantly talking to one side of the conflict and not really understanding, the other side, like the Taliban, the enemy, the insurgency. And so I wrote a book already on Hamid Karzai before, so I had quite some connections in the south, and that's important to understand and to get access. So I slowly rolled into it. It was a 5-year project, and I think I managed to get a little bit of a more nuanced picture about who he was and what the Taliban was and maybe is.
So you've spoken about the idea of writing this book and how did it develop. But overall, I mean, if you would briefly like to define on this book as to who Mullah Omar actually was and what your conclusion is, minus the fact that I don't want to give it away. I want the people to read the book as well. But who really was Mullah Omar in your opinion, given your 5-year study?
Yeah, I think Mullah Omar, I could not write about a person who was like so much from a world that I didn't know. It's unbelievable how conservative his background is. For example, I had to go to his village where he was born, his village where he was a student, when he was in a local madrasa where he was learning the Afghan way of seeing Islam, the Afghan way of seeing traditions and stuff. And that whole community I had no idea about, and I think in general we don't know enough about. I think he was coming from this very secluded part of Afghanistan that was really a powerless group for a very long time until the jihad came. And so because of the US weapons flowing in and many other people, many other countries who donated weapons to the jihad at the time, this Taliban, these basically religious no-nos, because they were not very important, managed to get a little bit of a cloud in Afghanistan, in the jihad. And Mullah Omar was one of them. He was not a prominent one, but he was representing this movement. And as we know, after the jihad, it was a total civil war. And I think without the civil war in Afghanistan, groups like the Taliban would not have any chance. But they were basically the last resort of men who were almost literally showing the Quran in the civil war, saying, with the word of God, we will offer the real Islamic State. We can offer this to you. And that's, Mullah Omar did that. Did Mullah Omar do it out of himself? I think another conclusion in the book is, at that time, Mullah Omar would not have been a leader. There would have not been a Taliban. Also, without the bigger, what you call businessmen / drug leaders in Afghanistan. The people who were trading, also in opium, were very much interested in ending the civil war, in opening the roads, get the economy starting. And so they also saw this group of students, this group of mullahs, and many were not even mullahs, they were just students. And they sort of started pushing their money into that direction, and weapons. And so yeah, that is also something that really helped Mullah Omar to become something. And since there was the civil war, it was like snowballing. The moment he got 1 or 2 districts, it was a lot of talking, a lot of negotiations with other tribes in the west of Kandahar. Then they went to the north, then they went into Herat, and everybody was like, okay, let's give this a chance, including the Afghan government at that time under Rabbani, who also, in the beginning, supported Mullah Omar. So then you have like this whole movement that rolls through Afghanistan. That offers something better. And yeah, Mullah Omar was a leader. He was a very unexperienced leader. I mean, he had no experience in anything with regard to political leadership, but he did have this sort of modesty. And he did have enough support to not be pushed out of power, if that makes sense.
As I say, I mean, not the right quote, but as I say, ideas are bulletproof, quite literally, in the case of Mullah Omar, who turned the idea into a movement.
Yes.
But with regards to the constitution of Taliban, you've spoken briefly. We've seen, and this is quite relevant to what's happening right now as well. He had a history with regards to women's education. Back in the day when the Taliban were in power, there wasn't much, the girls were not allowed out on the streets or out in schools either. So how much, or what was the idea, or what was the thing that led him to be such a hardliner, which is still followed even now, or that clout is still followed even now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that again comes back to his own background. I spent quite some time in Uruzgan, for example. His life has been shaped in this province. In 2006 was my first time, but I visited until 2014. Long stretches, weeks, sleeping on the floor, trying to talk to as many people as possible. That world is very familiar with no girls to school. That Uruzgan, Kandahar, there's a whole area that in Uruzgan in 2009, there were 3% of the girls were going to school in general, under the American invasion time. So for Mullah Omar, when he came to Kandahar and he got this power, and he had never been to Kabul, or maybe once, and he saw Kabul as like this heathen place where these things happened, where girls were walking to the shop on their own. And there was a total disconnect between them and the big city. And that clashed a lot. There was a lot of rumors. In Kandahar, there were rumors about the big city, of like how they were having prostitutes all over, how this was a, you know, this was like everything an Islamic State would not stand for. The Islamic State, the Taliban defined as an Islamic State. And on the other hand, Kabul, the rumors in Kabul about Kandahar and about Mullah Omar, and many people in Kabul still today don't believe Mullah Omar existed, for example. Or they had the weirdest ideas that he was almost like an animal, or that he was missing 2 legs. And so, yeah. But yeah, for Mullah Omar, if you really try to be in his mind, the idea of the role of a female is keep her inside, protect her. That's how Mullah Omar would say it. I protect her by putting on a burqa and let her not go out, let her take care of my family. It would be a shame if she would be in a schoolroom. I mean, it would be impossible for Mullah Omar to imagine that. His Sufi teacher, for example, Abdurrahman, he was driving his wife around and he asked her to lay on the back seat of the car. So she was in a burqa, but she also had to like lay on the back seat of the car so that nobody would see her. And that was seen in the crowd of Mullah Omar as very good, as very protective, as somebody who was taking care of the female. And so that is, it was a very strong idea. It was also, just another argument for Mullah Omar was to keep the women inside, is that he depended a lot on these young fighters who, his movement was mainly young madrasa guys, mainly pushed out through the jihad, being in the madrasas in Quetta, for example, who also didn't know Kabul, who were now, small mayors or governors, and he did not want to let them down. He thought that they also didn't want to see a female go into a shop without companion of a male, for example. So he needed his army. Massoud was still resisting at that time, so he needed to keep his army going, and for that he also stayed strict because of the morale. That's how he was thinking.
But Bette, this is actually interesting because while you've mentioned about the city and this rumor going about prostitution in big cities, post-Taliban, and I'll get you back in the current times, post-Taliban takeover, I was one of the few journalists to be in Kabul when the takeover happened. And the very next day, we had Logari Talibs guarding the Sarina, who were former suicide bombers or current suicide bombers, so not sure if we would feel protected or not. But we had a conversation, and by we, I mean we had a couple of BBC journalists, and I was there, and then NBC and a lot of other journalists as well. So this guy was a failed suicide bomber. He tried to blow himself up twice, and he could not. Now he was guarding us with a suicide vest as well. And he said that we came with the idea, and I quote, he said, when we came with the idea that when we would enter the Serena Hotel, there would be bloodshed because there'd be prostitutes all around, there'd be women naked and walking around. So do you not think that, just as an opinion, do you not think that this was just a show that was created, an imaginary show that was created to keep the people intact, to get the hardline version of Islam, or their interpretation of Sharia, and to keep the people intact at one place?
Yeah, it's definitely also became part of the propaganda to demonize everything that was happening under the Republic in the big city. Easy because many of these fighters didn't know Kabul, for example. I always encouraged Afghans who'd never seen Kandahar to just make one visit, to also get to know each other almost, to visit and to have the pleasure of Kandahar, because it was also a beautiful hospital city where so many people wanted to talk to me and explain who they are and who they were. This is also not a black and white story. You have a whole all layers of society is in Kandahar, but now, because of the civil war, it was like these mullahs who managed somehow to become the leadership of Afghanistan, which was also new to many Afghans.
But I think personally speaking, I think in Kandahar, when you had Enamino, the small town within the city, where people were essentially secluded, the wider audience, the wider public were essentially secluded, and not to demonize anything, but the common Afghans, when they tried to enter Enamino, the amount of disrespect and humiliation that they had to go through to enter that secluded area, I can just refer to it, no offense to Malik Riasa, but Bahria town or any cantonment of Pakistan. So I think that did also help Taliban to portray their narrative that, look, this is what's happening in just a secluded area. And then if you go to the city, if you go to the bigger side of the city or to the bigger cities, let's say Herat or Asadabad or Jalalabad or Kabul for that matter, at a bigger scale this is happening.
Yeah. If you ask, like, how come that after 9/11 the Taliban got so much support and was able to retake the country in 2001, its part is the propaganda, it's demonizing the other. They both did that. Kabul did that about the Taliban and the other way around. But I think overall, the reason why the Taliban got so much clout has nothing to do with the Taliban. It has mainly to do with an intervention after 9/11 of a foreign power that has experienced trauma on 9/11, is extremely out of revenge in Afghanistan. Special forces were extremely trigger happy to start a war. The reality in Afghanistan after 9/11 is that by that time, the Taliban had lost a lot of clout as well, before 9/11. Osama bin Laden was not popular in Afghanistan. It was much more popular in Pakistan in regions than in regions in Afghanistan. And so after 9/11, you deal with an implosion of the Taliban easily. There was not much to hold on. But you also, and that we didn't understand as Western journalists for a very long time, is that weirdly enough, we sort of like lumped them together. Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, all these insurgencies, they don't want to have anything to do with us. They hate us. They stand, like George Bush said, they stand for everything we are not. That was not true. In the sense that there was in the Taliban a range of men who wanted to engage with the West. They were never this anti-Western sentiment. They were not propagating it. They were not talking about it. For example, I didn't know when I studied this book that Mullah Omar tried super hard to become part of the UN. So you have a movement that is restricting women, that has super harsh justice rules, and wants to deal with the UN. Actually, they want to have a seat in the UN. And that is a combination of factors that the West had super big difficulties with to understand. I think what you see, sorry for the long story, but what you see after 9/11, many Taliban, including the leadership, surrendered to the Pashtun new president, Hamid Karzai. Hamid Karzai can be complimented for this because he was engaging in this surrender. He knew many Kandahari Pashtun in the Taliban. He was talking to them on the phone, meeting them directly. There were letters going over them to both sides. The Taliban had no appetite to continue an insurgency immediately after 9/11. That was an absolute opportunity for an inclusiveness of some sort. I'm not saying it would have been successful, but we didn't even try. Within 24 hours, Hamid Karzai got a phone call of Donald Rumsfeld saying, we are not doing anything with the surrender of the Taliban. They are and they will be our enemy. And I think Pakistan government went along with that. So suddenly you have this bizarre situation where you have a whole Western world come together with Islamabad who want to fight terrorism in Afghanistan while the terrorists have surrendered. So now come back to the question why the Taliban is big without really thanking the Taliban for being like for their effort, because there's nothing to thank for. What you see is basically you get a US intervention with the whole world, the Netherlands, my country, everybody was part of it. It was the biggest coalition in history starting this war. They get into a country without an enemy. That means you line up with the Afghan government, with the governors, with the police commanders, and you ask them, hey, where's the Taliban? And then this really complex dynamic starts where Governor of Uruzgan, who has a long past Sometimes the Americans think that when they enter into a country that the ally doesn't have a history, that the ally just pops out of the sky and does everything the US or the EU wants. They had long history. A governor of Uruzgan had a jihad, had a family to rule, had a militia to take care of, and had so many rivalries. So what happens in the first 4 years of the conflict is that the US is following the directions of the governor who said, the Taliban is in the Mirabat Valley. No. That is private conflict with Jah Mohammed Khan. But the US, trigger happy, went in and started arresting, killing, harassing, together with the governor, these people. And I think if you want to explain the Afghan conflict, this is the Afghan conflict. This is why soon many people just thought, okay, we can't trust these people. We are not safe in this country. And we need to seek an alternative, mainly because we need to defend our family and our honor. In 2006, one Taliban told me we didn't need to do anything to organize the insurgency. It was like mushrooms. It was like mushrooms out of the ground. It grew everywhere. So many people were hurt by the war on terror. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, that is the analysis I came up with in my book.
I mean, it makes sense as well because most of the fighters of this Taliban generation, which are now seen in Kabul or Kandahar or Logar or elsewhere, they're essentially in their 20s or early 30s. Most of them have not even seen Mullah Omar.
No.
And might have just read about him, right? So it totally makes sense to what you're saying. You mentioned Pakistan, and this is the last question, and before I go to the audience. Yep. What was, and how would you define Mullah Omar's relationship with Pakistan? Because there's a lot of talk. Yep. Some say he died here, some say he was treated in Karachi. I come from Karachi, so we used to hear often like, he's in Liaquat National Hospital, bed so-and-so, and getting treated there, or he died in Aga Khan, the Aga Khan Hospital in Karachi, and especially when the news of his death was leaked by what is believed the Afghan NDS, at a time when the Murray process was right on its second track, and just a day before when these talks were to be held. How would you define his relation with Pakistan, and are those myths, as they have been, are those actually true?
Well, so my starting point as a Westerner who has grown up with the Western idea about this region, and that in 2006 when I arrived in Afghanistan, I believed that was the truth, is that Pakistan was basically orchestrating the Taliban. And that Pakistan just needed to do this, and the Taliban would do exactly the same as that. So the Americans had also framed that there's almost one country, or like almost entity, the AfPak region, as if it's all the same. Problematic.
Was it closer to reality?
I think you have to, if you dare to intervene in somebody else's other life, you have to know a lot about the other, a lot. And knowledge, and being nuanced, and understanding, and have patience, and be modest also, for not knowing. It's not so easy to know another country. And especially when you have weapons, you use weapons to operate. That's like a huge responsibility if you want to pull the trigger. But I think that Pakistan does play, of course, Islamabad, the government of Pakistan, has played a role. Of course, neighboring countries, of course, they have a lot of interactions. Under the time of Mullah Omar, I come up with a little bit of a more nuanced picture, where you do see different aspects. You do see, on the one hand, these Kandahari Pashtuns who come with their own idea about Afghanistan, what they wanted to do with Afghanistan, a purely Islamic state in their eyes. At the same time, they were coming out of the jihad, they had enough of outside interference. The jihad was a complete outside interference affair. There were so many countries involved through Pakistan with weapons intervening in the country. And we have seen that completely destroyed Afghanistan. So there was that narrative too, like, do not touch us. Let us do our job alone. Now, at the same time, Pakistan was trying to have some influence because it's a neighboring country. Before 9/11, that relationship between Mullah Omar and Islamabad was troublesome. Mullah Omar was arrogant towards Islamabad. Islamabad wanted to have connection. Mullah Omar had his own opinion about that. He didn't really trust Pakistan. There's many Afghans who don't trust Pakistan, actually, and maybe vice versa. At the same time, you had activities in the border areas Mullah Omar didn't control, simply because he was just not powerful enough to control everything. You had the Haqqanis in the east, who Mullah Omar sort of let alone. Let's say, do your thing in the east, I am in the south. Mullah Omar had no idea about the east. I don't think he's ever been. So there, I sort of like narrowed that down to, before 9/11, I don't think Pakistan had the power to say to Mullah Omar, now take Herat. Do now not destroy the Buddhas. Do this, do that. That was not the case. Mullah Omar had his own opinion. For example, when the Pakistan government figured out that Mullah Omar wanted to destroy the Buddhas, they sent a couple of delegations. Now, is there a whole other reality going on with ISI? I cannot say that I know, because that's a secret world. I try to understand. I don't have a lot of proof of the ISI being extremely smooth in Kandahar. So yeah, after 9/11, when we have the rejected surrender and some Taliban do not feel safe in Afghanistan and seek other opportunities. I think I interviewed 10 Taliban in May when I was in Afghanistan. I said, what did you do to reconstruct? Like, what did you actually do after 9/11? Many went to Karachi and Quetta, but also have a story of fear. They were fearful of arrests. They had 3 passports. They were moving around. It was not that it was a safe haven for them. And the last point is that by following closely as much as I could, while I'm not from here and I have many limitations, is that I slowly, after 5 years, started wondering if Mullah Omar had actually gone to Pakistan after 9/11. And that came mainly because there was not much proof that Mullah Omar had been or was having a life in Karachi. I spent quite some time in Karachi talking to people. I spent quite some time with the Afghan intelligence who sent the story out that Mullah Omar was in Pakistan, but I didn't get much. There was no recent recordings, there were no movements, in the end there was not much. And so yeah, just to keep the story short, because there's much more in detail in the book, but when I found in the end Mullah Omar's driver and his bodyguard who had stayed with him.
How did it happen?
Yeah, my God. I heard in Zabul that there was an arrest of a guy who was on my list for a long time. I knew that this person was very close to Mullah Omar, and then they arrested him. So I had, after long lobby with the Afghan intelligence, I had access to him, and I listened to his story, and then I interviewed other people from Zabul, and I sort of present the story that Mullah Omar didn't trust Pakistan, that he refused to go and basically lived in Zabul in Afghanistan all the time, an area that's a purely Hotak area where he's from, his family is from. That doesn't mean the other Taliban were not in Quetta or Pakistan.
But when the book came out, a presidential spokesperson had rejected and said that quote, there is enough evidence of Mullah Omar being in Pakistan.
Yeah, and that Bette Dam is illusional.
Period, yes, hyphen, period, unquote. How was that? I mean, and what was that basically? Because as journalists, we always talk about evidence. At any point, did the Afghan NDAS or the presidency or the Presidential Special Protection Service, that was, did they present any evidence, or did they try to present any evidence except for some made-up documents which they believed were enough?
No, I don't, and they can still come up tomorrow, of course, with proof of a hospital bed with Mullah Omar in it in Karachi. I haven't seen it, and so what I did is interview many people who actually, most of them were on the record, so it's with names. It's not like this hundreds of stories in terrorism world without good sourcing. There are enough of that, but it's quite transparent. I did make a reconstruction of his life. I did go to where he was hiding. So yeah, so far I did. This is my story, and I think.
So I just last question before I
yeah.
put it to the floor, to open the floor. I mean, critics, and by critics I mean the former Afghan vice president, called it essentially Taliban PR, and not like it or not, but when the book first came out in 2019, we saw Zabiullah tweeting the pictures and validating the account that you had written as well. As a journalist and as a writer, as somebody who's worked extensively on this, well-researched, how was that to you, being called or being demonized as Taliban PR manager?
Yeah, I think.
Or is this Taliban PR? I mean, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, I leave that to the reader. I think we are living in, especially in this war on terror period, there has been a very strong idea that if you report on both sides of the story, which is the basic rule for any journalist, that you are demonized. Because the fact that I wrote about the enemy makes me a sympathizer for the enemy, which is massive. On Twitter, I can't say much anymore because there's so much hysterical response to, what is it? A journalistic attempt to do that. If you would send me tomorrow to Ukraine, I would go also to Moscow and try, or people who left Moscow and live somewhere else, and to try to present you the complex story. Now we only basically listen to Ukrainian stories, and we see. I find that problematic. So it's not an easy place to be in, for sure. It's much easier to say, "Oh, the war on terror was successful, and we arrested so many terrorists. Guantanamo Bay was also a good idea." I mean. No, that's a joke.
Yeah,
but
I mean, just to second you on that, when we talk about the war on terror, the US was so disillusioned from reality, and I'll give you an account, a witness account. On the 5th of August 2021 is when the renewed offensive had started to take over Kabul. That is the same day when the US embassy in Kabul had put out an advertisement, public advertisement, saying that they would want to construct a road from Masood Circle until the embassy compound. That's about 2 kilometers. And the on-site inspection, you'd be very surprised, was on the 15th of August, the day Kabul fell. And a greater deal of diplomats, US diplomats or people from the three-letter agency, they were of the opinion that nothing's going to happen. And in fact, even on the 15th, when the evacuation was happening, a section still wanted to go ahead and have that on-site inspection done for the road, the 2-kilometer patch from Masood Circle to the embassy compound. So with that, I think let's open the floor for questions. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand, and I'll give you the mic, and identify yourself as well, please. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum to all. Hi. As we read from many sources that at the time of Umar, Taliban are in power, and anyone did not know the exact contribution from where they get. But after Umar, they control over Afghanistan, and now they are going in Afghanistan. Which country contribute with them, and how much they contribute, especially Pakistan? And the second question is the word Taliban only exist in Afghanistan? This country have also Taliban. As we connect this group, how we are confused in this community. In one side, Pakistan is contributing with Afghanistan, and this country have also Taliban. Can we connect the Pakistani Talibans with Umar group? I have need some explanation about this.
Yeah, I felt that by studying the Afghan Taliban, and I only did what I could, right? I mean, it's a lot it's already a lot to study such a difficult story. But maybe one version of one little ingredient of the story that I saw is that there was indeed, in the time of Mullah Omar, and I think also after, there was a routine of fighters deciding more or less on their own or because of their local leaders to join the Taliban in the fight in the north. You saw the movements going from Pakistan to Afghanistan. In that sense, there was support for the fight, for the jihad that the Taliban was doing before 9/11. On the leadership front, like for example the Mullah Omar leadership level towards the Pakistani Taliban level, I find it a bit more confused picture. I don't think I saw a regular negotiation or meetings between the two. I think the same argument can be used in this sense, that I felt that the Afghan Taliban, Mullah Omar, was very much like, this is Afghanistan. If you want to help fight me in the north, fine, do it. I will not stop this border crossing, despite the fact that Islamabad asked Mullah Omar often to stop and close the borders. But I don't think the Pakistani Taliban came to Kandahar on the sort of like national level of political engagement. But I am not a Pakistani Taliban expert. I can only tell you from what I studied on Mullah Omar.
We have Ahmed Rashid Saab. Can you please give the first to Ahmed Rashid Saab, please? Thank you. Thank you, sir, for being here. Please.
Bette, thank you. Thank you very much. That was really an excellent presentation.
Thank you so much.
And your book, of course, has added so much knowledge to people who want to understand the Taliban, and especially now with the resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan and the resurgence in Pakistan. So making sense of all this is becoming, as you say, very, very difficult and very complicated.
Yeah.
And there are some very easy assumptions that we all made as journalists reporting from Afghanistan in the old days, which just wouldn't work right now. So I think it's absolutely crucial that more work is done and more research is done. There is no doubt that there's an enormous amount of information available in Pakistan to the Taliban. And unfortunately, we have not really released that information, nor have we, now we want to punish the Taliban because they're allowing Pakistani Taliban to attack here. So I think the situation is becoming more and more complicated, and more one-sided, as you keep saying in your presentation.
Yeah.
So I hope this will change, and I hope Pakistanis will themselves insist upon greater information and knowledge as to who are the Pakistani Taliban, who are the Afghan Taliban, and what are the differences between them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also a task of the journalist to do that and to figure that out. I feel like, for example, right now in Afghanistan, there is a lot of journalists who stay in Kabul while the power play is clearly in Kandahar. So we basically the Westerners who have more freedom still, it's going down now, but to go to Kandahar and to make connections and to understand why do they block girls' education? How many % of the Taliban is actually does this? Why is Haibatullah so strict? And until today, we don't know.
Mullah Haibatullah Akhundzada, the leader of the Taliban, has refused to meet with journalists or Western UN workers, aid workers, with anyone. Now, what do you think that is about? Is that about him trying to follow Mullah Omar's path? Because Mullah Omar was the same. He didn't meet with anyone either.
Well, Mullah Omar
he
did
met
meet.
with a few people, very few.
Can
Why is that? Why is Haibatullah isolating himself in this way?
I'll just interject and add to what Ahmed Saab was saying. Sir, Haibatullah did agree on meeting a couple of diplomats on the 5th of December last year. But following, and this was a chartered flight that was supposed to go from Kabul with UN diplomats and Western diplomats who are already in Kabul. But on the 2nd of December is when the Pakistani head of mission was attacked in Kabul. And after that, that meeting was called off. And that meeting basically never happened. But it took a great deal for the Shura, and I say this based on it took a great deal of for the Shura to convince they call Amir Saab to actually have FaceTime with Western diplomats or give a semblance of FaceTime with Western diplomats and try. But adding to what Ahmed Saab has just mentioned, we always hear that this extremist side of Mullah Haibatullah, which has now been practically implemented as well vis-a-vis girls' education and the hardliner verdicts and edicts that have been issued. Is it something to do with following Umar's footsteps? Is that the greater set of responsibility that he has to abide by and he's compelled to do so that his throne remains intact, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I would, and I basically, the last time, I'm not really reporting on the conflict. I do a PhD now, but the answer is we don't know. I mean, we can guess. I was in Kandahar in May just to basically be on a very free trip, not to write, just to see and understand a little bit. And in Kandahar, for example, there's this complaint that the Haibatullah has quite some Nurzai people around him. That's a particular tribe. And there's like dynamics that I was not able to figure out. That's power dynamics, that's between powerful tribes. That is one. I think we need to have an answer to that. I think we need to know. At the same time, I also got the feeling that girls' education has become a stick to hit also in the propaganda towards the West. There is the communication between the US and the Taliban as before 9/11, again now, is problematic. There's a lot of misunderstanding. I would almost suggest for the future of the Afghan girl and boy to have a mediator between the two, because there's really a problem between these two big powers talking. And we need informed interlocutors who can mediate that message, because it's constantly clashing. The Taliban want to have a compliment from the US saying, we have now peace in Afghanistan, we do have, the roads are open, we basically took Afghanistan back and we can offer people something. And the US is, from a different perspective, they blocked the banks, they stopped the financing, they come in and immediately said, we have 3 demands from you, you need to do this, you need to do that. You see that the Taliban is responding very sensitive to that. So, yeah, that's not in the benefit of the Afghan girl or boy at all. And we've seen this exactly the same before 9/11, and we see a repetition of this. The question is just who can negotiate between the two. I don't know.
Questions? We'll go back. Okay, first here, then we'll go to you. Yeah, that's okay.
Hi, I am Tajiri Shah. My question is that Pakistan has always been a frontline state against war and terror, but the West, particularly America, has never recognized his efforts and always wanted to do more. I believe, according to your research and your book, you have reached to the conclusion that Pakistan has very little role in the such Afghanistan conundrum and particularly terrorism. So why West have such image? Why Pakistan image has been projected like this in the West? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly the why, except that for example, there is that emotion in the US, indeed, of, yeah, and there is an interaction, of course, also between Washington, D.C. and Islamabad. It's not one side of the story. Both are involved in this. But when it came to, for example, understanding the Afghan Taliban, it was for me, the Taliban who were hiding in Pakistan, it was very difficult for them. They were very afraid of arrests or sticking out your head above something, then you would be arrested, because Pakistan was very uncomfortable and needed to somehow find a middle way with having these Taliban on their territory, but not too much. The US, in my engagements with the US, I said, well, maybe if you want to negotiate with the Taliban, don't go to Pakistan, because they don't feel very comfortable there. Why? How come they don't feel comfortable? They are hosted there. They have a warm welcome. And so that was constantly a debate between me and the US. I said, I don't think that is such a warm welcome. I think if you want to talk to them, fly them to Dubai, because they feel a bit more comfortable there, which I did in order to speak to them. So this is maybe a small example, of the different perspectives of the role of Pakistan. We do have a very strong idea in the US, but in the West also, that the ISI is very powerful. For example, I don't know. I didn't see that so much on the Taliban leadership front, for example. I saw a more gray picture. I'm not saying the Taliban is not powerful, but there was a complex relationship going on. It is better, and it is from the U.S. diplomacy, but also from the U.S. media coverage that is sometimes too much aligned with each other. I find that the US media should have a much more distance towards the US policy, which is difficult because they're both from America. But I would have a much more, a nuanced narrative towards Pakistan, because you have much more access if you do that, I think. Anyhow, I'm not a policymaker, but...
Right. Last two questions, because we're short on time.
Yeah.
We'll go to the gentleman in the back and then here.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have just two short questions. One, in your understanding of Taliban, what would be the areas the Taliban would be interesting to actually engage with the global community, with the West, in terms of both female education and girls' education, and also in terms of diplomatic engagement for counterterrorism of Daesh or ISIS. And second question is, do you see that there is a seriousness in the Western capitals, given their emergence, strategic politics in Indo-Pacific with China? Would they not strategically want to continue Afghanistan as a buffer state to play out against China? Thank you.
Right, tough one.
Yeah, also big questions. So on China, I must say that based also on their policy with China before 9/11, I learned that their idea of intervention from the outside is similar that they had towards other countries. They do want China to help build roads, for example, no problem, welcome. But China should not intervene in how they design their state, for example. That's a red line. They are very strict on that.
I think
yeah.
that has been the red line with Pakistan as well, because that approach that Pakistan had been opting or adopting as a fifth province, instead of dealing with Afghanistan as a sovereign, independent state and giving the impression, as it has been in the US as well, that whatever we want, we being Pakistan wants to do, it will be done by the Taliban, or they're an extension of the Pakistani military. I think that has really irked them, and that has taught them a lesson as well, that they don't want to be seen as a proxy of anyone, be that be Islamabad, or be that be Doha, or Abu Dhabi, or by extension of Beijing as well. And that is the reason they would really want to themselves to be reflected as a fiercely independent group that is now in government.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's how they want to, what they want to communicate, and I think also in some parts that they believe they are. Yeah. What was the other question? Yeah. I think the Taliban want to engage with many countries. They would be very happy if every country in the world would open their embassy tomorrow in Kabul. There's been always, also before 9/11, there's this very interesting feel towards, for example, the UN. They are very, they want to engage with them. The UN diplomats told me when they were driving their cars with the big logos in Kabul before 9/11, then the Taliban, local Taliban would ask them, "Are you coming? Are you opening more offices here?" But that doesn't mean intervention on politics. I still think that if there would be more understanding, but I don't now maybe sound like a defender of the Taliban, and maybe I risk that now. But I feel that if there would be more understanding of knowing them, their backgrounds, and level of knowledge would be extremely nuanced, I think the girls' education can be solved if there is an open, humane, and also a self-reflective response of like the US, for example, and Europe, who have made tremendous mistakes in Afghanistan, but who after 9/11 do not want to be remembered of that. At all. There's no reviews. The NATO reviews does some internal reviews, but look ahead. Look at Ukraine. We are already in a new war. And I think for democracies, you can do better, and also reflect on what you did and the pain you did to Afghanistan.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes. We've got one last question, and then we'll keep it brief, and then thank you.
All right. Kudos for the discussion. It was well put forward. I just wanted your opinion on the narrative that's been going around that while Mullah Omar and his policies regarding women are not justifiable in the modern world that we live in, but it can be explained as a reaction to the confirmed more than 13,000 drone strikes, killing more than 350,000 civilians, predominantly in Afghanistan. And mind you, I'm quoting you primary source material. This is verifiable by Watson Brown, Public Policy Institute in US. So, and not to mention the fact that fetishization of Afghan women at the hands of US and its allies and Russia as well. So Mullah Omar's policies, can it be explained as a reaction to the draconian policies, as a reaction to the US and its allies?
I think what we see now with girls' education is a product of a couple of things. Internally, there is still a lot of people in the South who have this older idea of girls in the school. It's a tribal idea to protect your family. It's not Islamic, but that's not the case. In Afghanistan, in the South, they believe that it is Islamic. I think it's also a product of this interaction with the West. I think the radicalization or the more orthodox response towards the position of the female in Afghanistan right now is influenced by that as well. And I think that instead of being hysterical about this or emotional, which we see a lot in the West, and we push aside, we isolate, understandably, but I feel that we also need, I also feel like we need to see our own role in this and understand why they do this. We still don't. What is the reason in Kandahar? What is going on in Kandahar? And we can figure that out. And I feel just like Afghan journalists have a super hard time right now in Afghanistan. Super difficult for them. It's a shame that they cannot do their work. But there is still the possibility for this white person to do some journalism there. And I feel that we can do a better job and provide you with what's going on. There's much more ground that we can explore.
I wish we had more time and we could have much more discussion and a much more open discussion. But unfortunately, we're out of time. I've been signaled to stop as well. So with that, I'll thank you and thank you so much for being a lovely audience, and thank you so much, Bette.
Thank you.
Please do get this book of hers. It's an inside account and the most authentic account. I've read that earlier when it first came. And it's certainly not Taliban PR, I can assure you that much. So please do, and thank you so much for being such a lovely audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am.